Alright, we got Balance of Power, Dalamar versus Akiyama, and yeah, I got to it a little late, but we have a 4-block board, which is generally pleasant for second turn. Dalamar is first turn, Akiyama is second turn, or at least I've been told. I don't know it so well. Dalamar has used 2 cards that are visible. He is suggesting that he has combo play against 9-3-8-8, landing an 8. Because otherwise, what are we doing here? Of course, that card gets a +1 and 8. Could be relevant. If I was Akiyama, I would be tempted to move in 1 with 4A7-3. But of course, if the opponent has something in 2, and it is kind of telegraphed, maybe a better way to think of this is the board is going to be divided into segments of 2, right? We're going to have 11 moves made over the course of the game, and there are 12 moves on the board. So if second turn never interacts with the squares 1 and 2, the best first turn is going to get out of it is a single flip, right? If they're powerful enough that going down, they'll flip Magmar. Not necessarily the case that Dalamar is a card that can do that. Yeah, Akiyama goes elsewhere. Now, oh, that has a +1. That's fun. God, I'm not good at E. But 2 of Akiyama's cards are still visible, right? And Dalamar could play 8-7, 8-3, and 8, for instance, and say, you don't know any of my cards, and I know 2 of yours, and maybe you don't have a great way to play one of the cards I can see, right? You know, if 4A7-3 could land in 1 last turn, I guess it can still land this turn, but, you know, there's a good chance that's covered. What else are you going to play? 9-3, 8-8, and 12? Maybe. I mean, you're probably going to play in 15. You're going to play 14. You're going to play 4A7-3 and 14, I suppose. So I guess if you're Dalamar, you probably want to take Scyther while you can. Ideally with an 8 or higher facing out, so that 9-3, 8-8 doesn't have a good move. He does take it, and you can see Akiyama has already picked up 9-3, 8-8, because he can't be left with 2 visible cards, right? So he flips back. Note, it was pretty likely Dalamar had the capture there. Even though a 10 wouldn't do it, there were 2 different walls that he could +1 off, and gaps of 1 are fairly frequent. Though I do think it was a reasonable move from Akiyama. And I think Akiyama is in decent shape unless Dalamar has the combo in 11. This also means, however, that if Dalamar plays in 7 or 12, I think Akiyama is obliged to block in 11. Does that mean Dalamar can force the action favorably? I don't really think so, because you get left with, like, say you go in 12 and Akiyama blocks 11, we're left with these 2 blocks of 2, and Dalamar gets has to go first in either pair of 2, and Akiyama gets to go second there. And it's like in poker, right? You're in position. It's a solid advantage. So I think if Dalamar has 11, he is in great shape. If he does not have 11, then my guess is Akiyama is ahead. Now, given that he hasn't played yet, my guess is he doesn't have it. And this is a tricky position to play if you don't have it. Maybe you go 8-7, 8-3 in 8. Because it's kind of scary for Akiyama to go in either 7 or 12. Because either one might set you up in a way you don't currently have, right? And if Akiyama does block 11, well, that is annoying. And he probably should. And again, you have these paired squares, and the game, yeah, probably slightly favors second turn there. You can see how the kind of even number of squares left means anything Dalamar does, Akiyama gets a chance to react. I'm not sure what should have been done differently. I think with 4 blocks on board, that's just kind of inevitable. And I haven't really thought about, or just don't understand TTN well enough to know if there's any way of avoiding that, maybe you try to cluster all the plays of the board in one place. Because, if the final 6 squares were like all a big cluster, then second to act in each part, I feel is going to make less of a difference. But that's hard to do with 4 blocks on board because it's hard to leave this whole cluster. So Dalamar does go in 12, threatening 11. And I think, and you can see that it sets up 8, 7, 8, 3 in 8, but that has a low number out. I think there is a very good chance now, the current score is 6-6, that Akiyama blocks 11. Dalamar plays in 8 with 8, 7, 8, 3, and Akiyama gets at least 1 capture in 7. And if he gets 2 captures, Dalamar needs to have 2, which he probably does have. And if he gets 1 capture, then Dalamar needs to have 1, which I think he's slightly less likely to have, given that we missed the start of the game, but Dalamar presumably must have played the card in 2, and therefore it seems likely he has stuff to play off it. 8, 6, 7, 8 could not flip that back. 7, 6, 5, 8 could not flip that back. 2, 7, 8, 9 may have been played after, may have been played before, we don't know. That could flip back in 7, but not in 2. So I think we have to assume Dalamar has something for 2. So my prediction is Akiyama plays 11, Dalamar plays 8, Akiyama plays 7, and it comes down to whether Dalamar can take Magmar, which he probably can, right? Most ways to take an 8 on 872A will also take Magmar's 8. Not always, though, but most ways. So my current guess is a tie. But actually, what's Dalamar saying? Dalamar is saying he is a card that is 1 higher to the right than down, and that's his remaining hidden card. How many cards that are 1 higher to the right than down can flip 872A and 2? Not many, right? Not many. 587A, that kind of card? That's not legal, is it? That's not legal. That adds up to 30. 5879, that kind of thing. Yeah, so Akiyama blocks 11. Because I don't know what card Dalamar could have left, I now think this favors Akiyama pretty cleanly. Dalamar can play 8. Maybe Dalamar didn't have 11 and was just putting the fear of God in Akiyama and forcing him to block there. Because I think Akiyama did have to block there regardless of whether it makes sense for Dalamar to have a card that's a threat there. Very curious what Dalamar's last card is here. I think 8, 7, 8, 3, and 8 has to be played. Right, you go in 7, you're just asking to lose. I don't... Unless you have something just phenomenal now for 7, in which case maybe you could do something goofy like 8, 7, 8, 3, and 1 or 2. But given the last move, it feels like the setup was for 8, 7, 8, 3, and 4. I could imagine going in 1 or 2. If you just line up really nicely on that endgame. Okay. He does go 4. Akiyama does take. And now Dalamar must take Magmar. You'll notice the -1 and +1 means 6 never flipped. And so if Dalamar does for some reason have 2 but not 1, that's a shame. Though actually, sorry, if yeah, okay. But I'm very curious what the last card could be. It really, if it can't take 6 from 2, not necessarily combo, but just take, but almost all takes have to be combos, right? Otherwise it has to be an ice to get the +1 to take. I don't know. I feel he must have it here, but also it's just hard to take an 8 sometimes. Like, you can see the rest of Dalamar's hand had no ways to take 8s facing up. Just none. 2-7-8-9 doesn't do it. 8-7-2-A, of course, doesn't do it. 8-6-7-8 doesn't do it. 7-6-5-8 doesn't do it. Ah, but he did have a way. All right, 5-8-8-4 will do it and gave a way to take back in 2. So we get a tie. I think this made sense. I think it also was kind of the right result for the structure, was that Akiyama would have a little pressure, though maybe if you can see Dalamar's hand, you know he's never under pressure. But from my view, it looked a little bit scary. 12 was an interesting move. That's probably the move worth thinking about here. Because I think, like, from at least the time I went in, I started looking. Like, after Akiyama played 13 and Dalamar played 14, like, Akiyama was gonna play 15 there. After Dalamar played 12, Akiyama was going to play 11. After Dalamar played 8, Akiyama was going to play 7. I think Akiyama's moves were all kind of automatic and dictated, and Dalamar had some choices to make. Which is part of the reason we looked at it from Dalamar's perspective, but the main reason is, as always, that because Akiyama plays so fast, it is impossible to watch any game from his perspective. Just going to check if they're playing another. And yeah, seemed like a reasonable tie. Those 4-block boards are tricky. I was asking someone who shall go remain unnamed what they thought the fairest block configuration was. And they said 3 blocks favors first turn, 4 blocks favors second turn. They were saying like, in general, 3 blocks is good for first turn, 4 blocks is good for second turn, and 2 blocks is the closest to neutral. And I think part of the reason 2 blocks is the closest to neutral is because a 2-block game is going to have a lot more spare squares left at the end, and so you can't force the pairing up of the board in the same way because not enough of the board fills. So 3 and 4 blocks has a much more forcing nature to it because it removes so many squares from the board that you are left with situations like the one we saw in this game, where there's 2 pairs of 2 squares left at the end, and 3 of those squares are going to get occupied, almost all of them. But, if you add 2 more free squares to that, right? If you go from 4 squares to 2 squares, then suddenly maybe there's a set of 2 squares left and a set of 4 squares left, and suddenly you're not forced to kind of go in a space where the opponent has the last reaction in that region of the board. All right, looks like they're up again. So we'll take a peek. Akiyama had first turn. This is a 3-block board, and it is one of the most favorable types of 3-block boards because it gave a free square, right? Now, we can also tell... So this is a hand game, right? I didn't realize this was non-random. That's interesting. I think a lot of players don't have enough cards to use a variety of hands, but my guess in general would be the cards they have showing are cards that they wanted to stick with. And the cards that are hidden, they are more likely to have changed, right? Because you can look like you're doing something familiar, but you varied stuff so they can't get the read. On the other hand, it's a kind of interesting set to do so. I'm not sure exactly what the stipulations are, but it's level 8, 9, 10. So let's assume it's something like 2 cards per level, or something like that, right? If it's adjacent to that, then it is very difficult. Then you're putting your weaker cards as your visible cards, right? But that means your hidden cards are the cards you're more confident of in the late game, and those are the harder cards to switch out of a hand. So I think it's tricky. Interestingly, I don't think Dalamar, if he's using the same hand he did last time, has a recapture in 15 here. Akiyama goes for a setup. Did we see a card that would be set up here? I think Scyther is 9913, not 9931. If he has one card for both those squares, this game is close to over, though. Just the board advantage is so large, I think, for first turn here. Who would I play if I was Dalamar? I don't know. If you think you can run Akiyama out of down cards, maybe you can go 12, and when Akiyama goes 15, you go 8, locking in 12, and hopefully with a high number facing out. But it is not obvious that he has that kind of high number in his hand. Maybe you just go somewhere like 1 or 4. Just put the action elsewhere. Say, okay, if you interact in 8 or 15, I interact back, and I'm fine with that. And so I'm just going to play in 1 or 4 and move action elsewhere. Ideally, something that doesn't give 9-3-8-8 an obvious play. But I think 9-3-8-8 is going to have a kind of obvious play. I think it fits pretty well in 10. I think this is a really difficult situation. It's just really hard to play on, like, the worst of 3 block boards. Just really difficult. I'd probably be tempted to chuck something in 1 or 4, though. Another idea, though I don't think a very good one, is start in 8, trying to induce Akiyama to take the free square in 12, and then you get 15. What you're essentially doing is saying, I'm going to really give up power on a square, but to try to force you to fill up these paired squares. But I think the problem is Akiyama just leaves it alone. I think he doesn't go 12. But if you can induce him to go 12, then I think you probably would want to go 8. Fundamentally, you have a problem, though. It's really hard for you to go next to 8-7-2-A. Yeah, I thought about this square, but I thought 9-3-8-8 now has such a good square in 10. Like, I guess 9-3-8-8 was kind of maybe going to land decently in 10 anyway, but it probably wasn't. As long as 8-7-8-3 or 2-7-8-9 were in your hand, which were both visible, and so certainly one would be in your hand, you could play that in 6 in a response. I would be very surprised if Akiyama didn't play 9-3-8-8 in 10. I think this move, and I am very surprised. This also suggests that Akiyama is using the same hand. We didn't see all 6 cards, but I'm now trying to remember. 4-9-2-9 is a card I would now put him on. Now, if his remaining 3 cards are 4-9-2-9, 9-3-8-8, and a hidden card, that hidden card better be awful good in 12 or 15. Because if you don't have something there, maybe this position's not so hot. On the other hand, you just got free cards in both. I mean, you got the automatic free one in 13, and you now got a free card in 10. Again, 9-3-8-8 there appealed to me more if you keep something hidden, but 9-9-1-3 has no power facing the game. So maybe I'm overly committed to the idea of you always get rid of your cards in hand, or your cards that are visible. Because Scyther might just play so badly here, it is not worth holding on to, and you'd rather something visible than something useless. But I think if we were going to give a free square like this, we have to force something more than we've forced here. Also, Akiyama had a lot of 9s up in his hand, and Dalamar actually has really nice coverage of that with the 8-7-8-3 and 2-7-8-9. So leaving open squares above where they can go might have some upside. Alright, goes in 5, and really suggesting we're just seeing the same hands here. We can see indeed that 9-9-1-3 would be pretty dead. I think I would not have gone here. I think it makes sense, but I would also... I'd probably lose this game by a lot more than Dalamar is going to lose it, because I think at this point I would probably just go 15. and say, if you're using the same hand as last time, your 4929 gives you 1 capture in 12, but not both, and not the critical one in 16. And so if your other card happens not to have coverage there, which seems to me possible that it doesn't, right? We've not seen a way that Akiyama could have structured his hand differently to set up against 16. Which is to say, if like Scyther, if we see Scyther and we go, oh, Scyther in 11 was a good setup, but he went 4A7-3, then what we should that should indicate to us is, oh, 4A7-3 is a good setup just with cards we haven't seen. But because we haven't seen any way for his hand to set up, except 9-3-8-8. But 9-3-8-8 in 11 sets up no, it doesn't set up 4-9-2-9. There's not an A up. What am I doing? I don't know what I'm talking about. So there's a chance there isn't a setup, and I would have said, I think, I am so far behind in this game that I need to just hope you're completely bluffing because those are my only outs. And I don't think like it's Dalamar's fault he's that far behind. I don't like the move in 6, but kind of there was one square that was automatic. You're down a card just for free. And then the 3 blocks in general is really tough. You're down like a card and a half after that. And then after you go in 6, you've given up a free card in 10. I feel like you're down like 2.5 cards, right? And when you're down 2.5 cards, my instinct is you got to do the thing that has a chance to come back that amount of cards. And while this may be much better for losing 7-5, it just seems very difficult. Okay, this is either a card we didn't see the prior game, and we can now see that is a card that had the setup in 15, or the hand has changed. But if the hand is the same, and I think if you're Dalamar, you have to play as if the hand is the same. Actually, then you're doing really well, because then your 7 and 8 up are actually quite difficult to deal with. Akiyama is pairing up the board. This is a powerful effect, but he only has 2 cards left. If he has a card that's good in both 12 and 15, you lose anyway. But I think at this point, we have to gamble. There's also maybe a case for playing 2, 7, 8, 9, and 4, but I think at this point we should gamble. I think we should play in one of 12 or 15. Because if the last card is 4929, you know, you play in 12, they play 4929 in you play in 12, they play 4929 and say, oh sorry, you play 15, they play 12. It's 6-6. And 9-3-8-8 is showing. All you have to do is do enough damage to dodge that beating you. You play like 2, 7, 8, 9, and 2. And so I think the important thing about going in 15 here is Akiyama has to use his hidden card, or he's not ahead. Maybe he can still just play 1 with 9-3-8-8. And you have a bunch of captures, and you combo. So I think you hold there. I think this is I think you have to go 15 here. He goes for 4. I sort of considered this, but I also thought it's giving 9-3-8-8 another capture on board, and it also frees up capturing in 1. It is still 6-6, right? Situations where the combos are against you, but the score stays close, you still have a chance. So Dalamar is still giving himself a chance here. Probably. There was also a case for going in 12, for saying you used your card for 15. I'm going to go in 12. Not very inspiring, though. I'm very curious if Akiyama's remaining cards are the same as we've seen before. If they are, 4929 is a pretty dead card. If they are not, alright, that is a change. Alright, so he's up 7-5, and yeah, here it's really a problem that 9-3-8-8 has a capture on board. Because I think it's just a loss now, right? Given that you can't combo through 2, I guess it has another capture on board in 1. But like if you could block 1 while taking 2, that would make it 6/6. Your 8/7 2A is safe. This means Akiyama was not bluffing. He did have cards for both 12 and 16. Yeah, they were sames as well. That's brutal. I think this was not a game ever being saved here. Very difficult block configuration. I like how Akiyama played it. I think the move in 3 was a pretty clean way to do it. It did give up 15. But if Dalamar goes in 12, which is pretty unlikely, you can still play 9/3, 8/8 in 15. You still grab a card there. You're still 6/6, and your A2, 8A is pretty strong. Yeah, I think this was a nice way to play it. Elegantly played by Akiyama, and just a very difficult situation for Dalamar to ever play. All right, so that's a Balance of Power. I think this was round 3, technically. Second round in loser's bracket. I think that's what this was. And yeah, there you go.